Hi, this is a little video I am going to record in response to a promise to show how it is possible to blend different colors when you're doing Neurographica lines. Now, this is just the way that I do it. I'm sure there are many ways. So I've got a relatively small bit of paper and the camera quite close, so hopefully I'll be able to show it. What I'm going to do is draw a line. There we go. And I'm going to draw a line in a different color. Now, I don't actually, what I should probably do is get a Sharpie because it's a bit okay. Okay, so here I have a red Sharpie and that was a black liner. So I'm going to cross them over. And hopefully you can see that they're just in terms of Neurographica line, even when I round, which I'm now going to do with a thinner marker, the colors don't blend. And sometimes that might be what we want. We just, for whatever reason, we don't want to. Can't think why at the moment, but anything is possible. It could be a styling choice. So you can see if you sort of change that line a bit, if we go over them with the second color, whichever one the second color is, while it's still wet, they do kind of bleed into each other. Now, the more different the colors are, the more difficult it is. I'll do it in a minute with a pink highlighter and see how I get on with that. So you can see that the color does sort of bleed in. So we've got a conjoining which incorporates color and shape. And even if it's not perfect, if we're talking about making these beautiful connections that we make in Neurographica, um, and really indicate to ourselves while we're doing it and also while we're looking at it, we could do something like that even, that we are connecting these lines, then color is quite an effective way of doing it. Now, it is an imperfect process, as you can see, especially because I'm using quite thick markers here. Now, I happen to have thinner red here, slightly different color, but the thinner your marker, and thin markers are not good for everything by any means, the more possible it is to get something quite precise going. Now, as you can see, there's a tendency for the darker color. I don't know if I've already said this or not, actually. Apologies if I had the darker color to be more dominant. So that is something that just will happen. So you can see what we've got here is not something that's perfect by any means, but if you're looking at it, you know, because what do we do after all with our Neurographica drawings? We look at them and we show ourselves what it is that we have created and what we're wanting to create. Now let's see how that works. I've never actually done this, how that works with a highlighter, because that's then very different. I'm going to show you something else in a minute after we've done this. In which we do the same thing but over some pencil work. Because what I've got here is paper that's quite absorbent, and different paper has different levels of absorption. You see, we've got this bleeding effect. So we do have it bleeding in, but you will get, I mean, the lighter color, in this case, the highlighter, does become, I don't know what you'd want to call it. I'm going to go with my thinner one here. Um, Perhaps a little dirtier, muddier. So in terms of aesthetics, that's something we all need to decide how we want our drawings to look, right? But in terms of actually conjoining or rounding lines, visually, we are showing ourselves that we are making these connections here. We are desiring for that pink line to connect with the black line. And there may be some compromise sometimes in relation to the purity of our color, certainly. Maybe the aesthetics of our drawing. I'm going to just do it into the red. This has no meaning, by the way. This is just random doodling. So now we've got red, black, and pink connecting. I see I'm making choices here about how I'm defining the line. There we go. This is a very basic example. And you can see that the closer that the colors are, the easier it is to do this in a way that sort of blends visually better, for want of a better word. Another example of this might be black and blue. This is quite a thin marker, but so I'm conjoining that. And already you see it doesn't look that different, does it? But if I'm really wanting to make a connection here, and as I've said in workshops before, thinking about the movement of energy, you can see it as water or electricity, connections being made, then there's something about showing myself that I'm really making that connection here. So you can see this is a much easier kind of blending to do than this one, say. Now, the second thing I'm going to show you is how it can be a little bit different if we do this over pencil, and it may depend on the kind of pencil. So I'm going to do a bit of an experiment live. Let me see if I can choose a relatively light color. I'm deliberately choosing a waxy pencil here. Here we go. Here's a light color. These are, what are these called? The Faber-Castell, what are they called? Just when you want something, you can, I think, polychromos, there we go. So they're a waxy pencil, which means that when you color with them, they create a little bit of a barrier between the paper and your pens. Now, whatever pen we're using, whatever kind of marker, they all I don't know if you found this as you've been working with different colors and perhaps even different markers, they all have slightly different properties. I've found, for instance, that Stabilo Boss highlighters um, just behave a little bit differently to these ones, Faber-Castell ones. So a lot of it is trial and error. What do I like? And even some colors behave a little bit differently, which is interesting. So here we go. Whatever color I have, it's created this a slight barrier. It's not a complete barrier, which means I'll show you two things actually. This is quite an interesting thing. Say I'm going to draw a shape. Let's say I have a circle here. A little bit neurographic, not very. And if this was a proper drawing, I would be conjoining that immediately, wouldn't I? But and part of what I want to do is colour part of it with highlighter but I don't want a really definite line. So what I can then do, and this sometimes works really well, sometimes it doesn't, is while it's still wet and it stays wet for longer if I do it on top of a pencil. And I'm going to try it in a minute on top of a different kind of pencil to see what kind of difference it makes. And you can see it you can kind of spread it around a bit. So, and I might do that on top again. You can end up with this quite intense color, but without that very sharp edge. Anyway, that's just something I discovered on my journey, on my Neurographica journey. I thought I'd share that with you. Now let's see how that affects conjoining different colored lines. And I'll go for the difficult one again. I'll go for the pink and the black. So I'll take a black line. I'll make it quite definite. And I'm aware, because it takes just marginally longer to dry, because the paper isn't quite as absorbent, because I've done it on top of the pencil, that if I immediately go over it with my highlighter, it is going to smudge. Uh, maybe I want it to smudge if I'm going to be conjoining anyway. And you can see there is a kind of reaction there. I didn't get so much when I didn't do it on top of the pencil there. Actually, let's just do a little experiment live. I can even do something with a pencil here. So part of what I guess I'm showing you is there's an element of trial and error involved. And if you've done a beautiful drawing and you're thinking, oh, I really want to conjoin some lines that are different colors, maybe practice first on another bit of paper if you're really delighted with how your drawing looks and you don't want to do something that, you might not like very much. I mean, sometimes I've got to say there's something to be said for just trying stuff out and taking that risk, because it immediately feels different when I'm doing a highlighter straight onto the paper as to how it did here when I'm doing it over the pencil. But because you see it stays wet for a little bit longer, I've got longer to fiddle with it, and this is not necessarily very pretty, but again, in terms of creating a movement of energy uh, in the at those places where lines cross, it does do the job. So again, it is not perfect, but I hope you can see that it sends a message to all those parts of us that experience the drawing. As I said before, the part that's actually doing this and saying, no, I really want to make this connection here, and the part that's seeing it. And this is in my last workshop why I said we can use different colored lines, but if we want to conjoin them, it can take a bit more time and attention to do so. Okay. Let me now try. The other day, I bought a packet of pencils. I'm going to pause the video because oh no, here they are. These were the cheapest pencils I could possibly find. For anybody who lives in the UK, you might know the Works. These are pencils that come from the Works. Because these polychromos are really quite an investment. So I wouldn't say to anyone, run out and get some unless you love working with different kinds of pencils. Because they cost quite a lot. The one advantage I would say, at least here, is that in certain shops anyway, they are available as single pencils. So if you get a packet and you use one color more than the others, you don't have to then buy a whole new packet when you've worn the pencil down so small that you can't use it anymore. So there we go. That's a pretty good color, I'd say, from this pencil. How does it feel? Yeah, it feels as though it has created a similar sort of a barrier there. So let's have a go. Oh, let's extend this line. So yeah, okay. And this is a good example too of that beautiful sort of transparency of highlighters, um, which allow us to see the color underneath. So it's not really very problematic conjoining the same color. You can like that this shows again how this when you do two colors that are very different, it can be a little bit tricky. Let me see. I'm just going to use this is the pencil from the works. This bit here, which is that's a darker pink than the highlighter, but it is creating somewhat of a smoother transition. Now, see, I've never done this before, is try to conjoin two colors that are so different. What I'm discovering is that it is possible, though it's not so easy when the colors are as different as this. Especially if you're working straight onto paper. Right, let's try it with the red. So this is a Sharpie. Again, they all behave slightly differently. Um, the pens I'm using, by the way, are the black ones are by Unipen and Staedtler. I tend to like those over Sharpies simply because I don't really like the smell of Sharpies. I think they are great pens. So not knocking them, that's just a preference. So something that highlighters do as well is they can kind of melt. I've heard there's probably some better way of putting it. Kind of dissolve, melt, I don't know, uh, some of the other colors around. Is that beautiful? I don't know. I think part of what I'm demonstrating here is that this can require a little bit of love and attention. And is sometimes feels right, sometimes feels really good. I have, as I've said, used different colored lines and then conjoin them. It does tend to be easier when they're smaller. Here, let me show you. This is a 0.3, which is pretty thin. I can join that onto there. And I'll bring that into the black over here. Right, and yeah, you see that pink kind of moves it a little bit. So you've got a little bit of leeway. Moving over here. Again, black will always overtake. And if that is displeasing, what else can we try here? Right, I've never used this color. This is from the new packet. Let's see what happens. Is this dry now? Oh, I've already done that there, haven't I? This is still a little bit wet, you see. So if you want to mess about with it, this is all trial and error. That's why I say risk it on a drawing by all means. I do all the time, and sometimes there are times when I'm like, oh, why did I do that? But it's a bit like life in a way. It's like sometimes we do things and we might think, oh, that's changed the picture, that's changed the situation. Now I have to adjust. And that's why I tend to, if I do something that changes my drawings in ways, yeah, not as effective. Changes my drawings in ways that I don't like so much, then sometimes I need to adjust the drawing in order to accommodate the choice that I've made. And that's an interesting process in itself. Of course, it makes the whole exercise a lot longer. The other risk that you run by doing what I'm doing here is messing up your pens because sometimes they don't like being blended too much with waxy pencils or highlighter for that matter. So, of course, this is a little bit tricky because it's quite fat. So anyway, I hope that is of some help. Like I said, this isn't an instruction that one should do this because there may be times when you want your lines not to blend. It could be a styling choice. But if you do, then this is just to show you that it's possible. And I'm sure there are other ways too, but this is at least a beginning. All right. I hope that's helpful. If you've got any questions, just get in touch. All right. Bye for now.